Well, hello everyone. I'm putting together a brief little lecture video to discuss the material related to teratogens. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Teratogens basically comes from the Greek word terra, which, believe it or not, means monster. But when we talk about teratogens here in psychology, all right, we're talking basically about those things that can happen within the womb and can result in a birth defect, excuse me, for an unborn child. All right. So think birth defects for an unborn child. And these are things that a lot of times you may, to a greater or lesser extent, have an influence upon an expectant mother can, and things like that. Now, some of these are very direct. Direct causes basically means things that will turn around and have an impact upon the mom, such as radiation. I've told in class and things like that the idea that you go to get X-rays as part of your dental visit. That's radiation. There's very little doubt that X-rays have a very negative impact upon a developing embryo and later fetus. So that is very, very direct. Excuse me. More indirect causes basically involve things such as maybe secondhand tobacco smoke, being exposed to caffeine and things like that. Things that do not directly, immediately by their exposure, put you at risk and things of that sort. So there's a little bit of a difference there. Direct, using it, being around it, it's going to be a problem. Indirect, being exposed to it is not an immediate problem, but it can be. The most common reactions to any to any teratogen to an unborn baby is that they run the risk of being born premature. And when it comes to premature birth, what we're talking about here is low birth weight because they're born premature. So as I've said in class, and if you have not heard it, I'll tell you now, that the weight of a fetus tends to double in the final trimester, the final 3 months. So if a child, due to a teratogen, is born 2 months premature or 3 months premature or something like that, then that's all the less weight that they will weigh when they are born. So you have a low birth weight that goes and is associated with a premature birth. Now, when we talk about teratogens, okay, um, there are some of the most common elements include drugs, both legal and illegal. I don't know if you can tell from the picture there because my picture is sort of blocking it just a little bit, but there was a drug, and I want you to know this, called thalidomide. I think it's Thalidomide. Thalidomide. You can look it up. Thalidomide, believe it or not, was a legal drug that was prescribed to expectant mothers back in the 1950s because basically it turned around and took a mother suffering from morning sickness and eliminated the morning sickness. And so it was, at the time, it was sort of seen as a miracle drug. All right, no more morning sickness. The problem became very quickly that children born to mothers who took thalidomide were born with, distorted or absolutely no arms or legs. Sometimes they were very, very short. Sometimes they were not there at all. And so it didn't take long for them to realize that the difference between these mothers and their lifestyle versus mothers that gave birth to healthy babies was the use of this drug. So, I mean, it was immediately stopped. You would think that something like that would have been in some way, shape, or form tested prior to its being prescribed, but it was not tested fully, and thus, we had what were called a world of thalidomide babies. That, believe it or not, is a legal drug. Other legal drugs include caffeine. That can have an impact. Tobacco is legal based on age. Those are things that can have an impact and are considered a teratogen. Illegal drugs obviously include things such as heroin. Heroin babies when they're born, they're addicted to the drug, just like the mothers are, and the withdrawal symptoms are absolutely horrible. We've had cases of babies that don't want to be touched. They are in constant pain as they're going through withdrawal, and it is, I've heard it's been known to last up to a year that before they've totally withdrawn off the drugs. So extremely loud screaming and crying, and they just hurt terribly. Um, Others, I'm trying to think, cocaine, and even marijuana. You know, everyone believes that marijuana is basically harmless, but we find that it has an influence on the development of the central nervous system and even the respiratory system. So, used by expectant mothers, extremely ill-advised. Okay. Illness and disease. This is another possible teratogen. If a mother turns around and finds that she is sick and running a fever, and it's a fever for extended time, if she is running hot, so to speak, with a fever, the baby has a fever. And that kind of stuff can be damaging to the development of the brain in that regard. Environmental pollutants. Some of the most common environmental pollutants that we see is mercury in water levels and things like that. City water a lot of times is treated and filtered to minimize that, though some moms choose to drink bottled water anyways. But sometimes well water and water in third world countries can have natural levels which are high of mercury and things like that. Someone even told me that lead levels in water can be high as well, and I believe that to be a possibility. Now, some of the unexpected things that you might not be thinking of is the parent's age. With Down syndrome, especially moms who are not in their 20s, maybe more in their 40s, maybe even in 50s at times, can have an impact. And we're now finding that there is a paternal aspect. We're just starting to study that maybe it's dad that has an impact upon that. It's a hard thing to scientifically study. You have to rely a lot on case studies and surveys, but we are learning that the parent's age might have an influence on the probability of suffering a birth defect. Incompatible blood types. I'm not going to get into a discussion of the different types, O positive versus AB negative and all those impacts. I just want you to know that the differing blood types between the mother and the father can have an impact upon the child when it is born. And one of the easiest ones to control is nutrition levels. One of the things that you will find these days is that a lot of places, even Walmart, as well as places such as GNC, General Nutrition Centers, and others, they have nutritional packets, prepackaged vitamins designed for expectant mothers, and very easy to take on a daily basis and so on. I think of the lack of the proper nutrients, folic acid, for example, found in green leafy vegetables. A lack of that, especially if its mother is more susceptible to this, can lead to spina bifida, curvature of the spine, and problems there. So yes, proper nutrition, whatever mom takes and ingests is what the baby ingests, okay? And then one of the surprising ones, which I would definitely put under this category, is stress. If the mother is under continuous stress, if she is under stress, this tends to basically increase adrenaline levels, and which increases heart rate. Stress also tends to constrict blood flow through the body. And if the blood flow through the body is a bit constricted, and it stays that way due to constant stress, that's all the less oxygenation that might be occurring that can have a negative impact upon the mom. So these are some of the things that you might expect, some of them you might not expect. Another one that I mentioned a moment ago, and I want to mention again, is caffeine. And a lot of sodas have caffeine in them. And so drinking something such as Sprite or root beer, which naturally does not have caffeine, might be an alternative for an expectant mother, as opposed to some of the sugary, high caffeine soda pops. Now, with all that being said, and you got to know this: no mother, excuse me, no mother can be completely immune to all possible teratogens. You cannot escape all of them. All right, even going outside with the sun shining, the sun is radiation, but no mother can escape all possible teratogens. The best bet is to minimize exposure and minimize the opportunity to be influenced in a bad way by these. Now, to me, in my opinion, and I stand by this, that doesn't give a mother the right to do things that are, dangerous. Well, I'm going to drink alcohol, but only, go out for tonight and drink alcohol. I'm not going to do it all the time. Very, very dangerous idea. Not a good idea at all. That can be very detrimental. But doing what you can to minimize things is a big one. I get back to the moment of alcohol. We talk about what's called fetal alcohol syndrome, mothers that drink during their pregnancy, giving birth to a child that might be suffering from intellectual disabilities, formerly known as mental retardation. And I mean, that's permanent. But, all things considered, it's something that you have to accept the fact that you can't get away from all of them. These are the characteristics to watch out for. These are the things that can have an influence, all right? Critical periods of exposure. I'll show you here in just a few moments what times within a pregnancy, what periods within a pregnancy you are at most risk, and what is at most risk, okay? How long are you exposed? Someone that turns around and has very minimal exposure for a very short amount of time lessens the probability of long-term damage. Okay, so if you're exposed to something, you have water, well water, and you didn't think about it till later, it could have mercury in it and things like that, and 2 drinks of 2 sips of water, and you push it aside. Hopefully that will minimize the chance because the amount of exposure is not that big. And then finally, one of the things that you really have very little control of is what is called genetic susceptibility. With genetic susceptibility, some moms, for reasons that we don't completely understand, are more susceptible to certain teratogens than others. In other words, the damage that is done is much more severe than one might expect from one mother than another. Knowing what those markers are is difficult. It really, truly is. So be aware of that. Let me say something here about critical periods of exposure. Hopefully you can still see this here, but what you're looking at is a breakdown of the period of the germinal stage. That's on the far left, the first numbers 1 and 2. And then from 3 through 8 is the period of the embryo. And then beyond that is the period of the fetus. And if you want to take a close look at that, you can see that that area which is in red is highly susceptible. That's a major congenital anomaly. So something such as the nervous system, okay, the brain especially, is very, very susceptible to teratogens for quite a long period of time. Other aspects there, such as limbs, eyes, ears, the heart, very susceptible in the early part of the pregnancy. It doesn't mean that they're not susceptible later. A few of them look like they're not as susceptible at a later time, upper limbs and the heart and so on, but you still want to be careful. You will note that the first 2 weeks, after conception, during the germinal phase, there's no red area, there's no orange area, because moms, their unborn baby is not attached per se to the wall of the uterus, and during that time they are not really susceptible because the blastocyte is self-sustaining. So that is a small blessing in that regard, but most moms don't know they're expecting during that time. So All right, that's a quick overview of teratogens. If you do have questions, obviously email me or catch me in class. For now, take care.